of start off by thanking the admin team, board, for us to be able to have this presentation and have this engagement in this dialogue as we kind of explore this option. And like Dr. Hazel said, this is just one option. There is no specific commitment tonight other than just to submit the application and seeing the district's kind of eligibility. So the main reason why we're here and specifically doing this presentation is because over the last couple of weeks, the DOE kind of released some information as it pertains to this tax levy incentive program. And just to kind of give a little bit of background, so, you know, going back to the funding formula of 2008, and I'm not going to rehash a lot of the similar points that Mr. Boyce Good.
That's good.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mendez. So, Mr. Boyce, obviously for the last several years, has kind of reviewed the impact of S2, the funding formula, and obviously the greater kind of decisions and long-term impact on the district. So, for the most part, the S2 legislation was adopted in 2018, and the intention there was to, over the course of time, to kind of shift our liability from the state coffer to the local taxpayer, especially for districts that are seeing kind of a decline in enrollment, change in equalized value. So, Dr. Hazel said, the adequacy budget is the level of funding a school district needs to provide a very efficient education. And as identified by the DOE this year, the district is $30.3 million under adequacy. The local fair share is the amount of revenue to be raised by the local taxpayer. So that number is approximately $69.6 million. So in both of those metrics, the state is basically saying that the local taxpayer can afford more. And as we've seen in terms of kind of the community, and as we kind of look, you know, and appreciate the importance and the significance of the regional district to the 10,000 kids that we service, as well as roughly the 200,000 you know, residents of the municipality over the 200 square miles, we know that that is not something that is taken lightly. And whether it be Mr. Boyce prior to me, this board, myself, Dr. Hazel, we understand that these decisions are not made in a vacuum, and as a result, we need to be able to kind of explore different alternatives, explain and be transparent with both the board and the public as everybody kind of makes the decisions. And like Dr. Hazel said, you know, as we look at, this is just kind of a lab line for tonight, but as we look at kind of the state aid over the last 10 years or so, you know, in FY16, we basically had $51.4 million of state aid, and now we're down to projected 29.6. So, like Dr. Hazel said, and just kind of stole a little of my thunder and some of my data points, right? But in FY16, the state aid that state aid made up 26.5% of our budget, and now, or most recently in 25, it's close to 15%. So, then the question then becomes is that during these years, especially the S2, what we call the S2 years, which is the biggest decline, and it kind of looks like a little roller coaster. It's not a roller coaster that the district has appreciated being on, right? And so the decisions that Dr. Sampson and now Dr. Hazel, Mr. Boyce, myself, the admin team have had to make over the course of these years have been significant. And some of them have been very upfront and visual to the average taxpayer, the average parent, like increased class sizes, like the condemnation of our tennis courts. And then there's other stuff that is not as evident, stuff that's behind the scenes, pooling on the roofing, windows that are 40 years old, boilers that are going. So those are the things, like Dr. Hazel said, in terms of kind of the district's kind of long-term kind of impact. When we look at, you know, what impacts a student's classroom and the decisions that were made, they tried to be as far away from the classroom as possible. And I don't, you know, I would have done it exactly the same way. So from that standpoint, just like we have our own homes we have a boiler, we have hot water here, we have an air conditioner, a roof. Just as an example, the unit ventilators that I'll go into in a little while as a potential kind of item that needs to be addressed based upon the Spiesel assessment from several months ago. We have 349 of those. Those are just the ones that need to be addressed. So when we look at these numbers and the impact and the maintenance of effort, they're significant, and obviously it's critical that we kind of look at it from that standpoint. So moving on in terms of kind of just the maintenance of effort. So over the last roughly 15 years or so, the district has averaged about $3.3 million, which is this blue line, in terms of just maintenance as well as capital improvements. And so for the most part, as we look at kind of industry standards, whether it be private sector, whether it be more tailored to education, Governor Accountability Office, the ASBO International, National Council of Schools, those folks all kind of estimate that the investment in facilities should be somewhere between 1.5 and 4% of your replacement cost. So for us, just as an example, most recently our insurance estimate in terms of replacement cost is approximately $421 million. So that level of effort probably should have been closer to $11 million over that same 15-year time period. And like I said, in talking to professionals that were here before, and obviously working with Mr. Verdoni and his team now, the infusion of that money, or the lack thereof, over the last 15 years has made a significant dent, right? And like I said, just like not much different than in our own homes when the boiler goes and the hot water heater goes and the roof goes at the same time. That's basically the situation that we're in right now. And like I said, the average person, you walk by the buildings are clean, the buildings are maintained to the best of our ability, but there's things that are breaking that obviously we need to kind of consider. And the concern is, whether it be a referendum like Dr. Hazel said, or whether it be another path that systematically addresses these issues, that gap will continue to get wider. And that's something that we need to kind of be considered. So some of the examples, unit ventilators are pretty common. Those are things that obviously just about every classroom has it. Gym floor, the gaps are starting to widen in certain buildings like Freehold Township and Marlboro. We can't sand the gym floors anymore. So it's not like a situation where you can sand them one more time and just print the graphics on and just recode it. You're basically down at the tongue and groove already. You're starting to see those gaps appear in between the boards. That obviously just happens over the time. And at the end of the day, that facility assessment that Spiesel did for the district kind of came up with a number of roughly over $600 million. And obviously that's not going to be anything that we would want to kind of put on the back of the taxpayers in terms of those significant numbers. But the reality is that we have, just in terms of interior building space, we have over 1.4 million square feet. And that's just Marlboro by itself has 264. And the reason I bring up Marlboro is because in this plan that we're working together with, as we're kind of fine-tuning the potential referendum, there's roofing on that plan. And that roofing is roughly 91,000 square feet, right? So if we take the 91,000 square feet, add roughly 20 or 30,000 square feet that were part of the 2021 referendum, there's still a gap. That means that at some point in the future, we're going to have to go back to the taxpayers, even if this referendum kind of plays out. So moving on, these are a couple of other examples. On the right-hand side is a condensing boiler. Back, I want to say 20 years ago or so, there was an ESIP program that allowed us to kind of replace some of our old cast iron boilers with these newer, more efficient condensing boilers that, as you can see, watermarks are not normal. HVAC condenser unit on a roof, rusted, that's not normal. And The concern is that at some point, and we just recently had it at Freehold Township, thankfully we're kind of coming up to the end of heating season, but basically 2 of these condensing boilers basically went down just around the same time. And one of them had to be basically scrapped to be able to fill the other one to get the second one up and running. This is not, you know, as a superintendent that I used to work with basically says, this is not how you run an airline, right? We have to be diligent, we have to be strategic about these decisions. So back to the concern about the ongoing maintenance and the maintenance of effort. And like I said, in that, as you saw in that slide, and that gap is going to get bigger. If we haven't been able to kind of maintain that effort over the last 10 or 15 years, what makes us think that in a 2% tax levy cap environment that we're going to be able to do it going forward? That is critical to this discussion. So basically, like Dr. Hazel said, on the agenda tonight, there's a resolution to basically have the board approve the submission of an application. Like I mentioned before, we're still in the works with the referendum option and exploring all those steps. And at the same time, this tax levy incentive program. So I'm going to kind of give a little bit of an outline of what this is all about. So at the governor's budget address in February, basically one of the lines that was in the proposal and the printout that came in afterward was about $20 million towards this tax levy incentive program. So unlike last year, where there was very specific legislation that allowed districts to go over the 2% tax levy, this is going to be part of the Appropriations Act. In essence, the state budget that gets approved every June in preparation for the budget. So the component of this is this state matching, all right? And the state basically is saying, hey, for districts that, whether you took advantage of the program last year or not, if you're still below adequacy and you're still below local fair share, we'll allow you to go over your 2% tax levy, okay, up to your adequacy number, which for us, like I mentioned before, is $30.3 million, okay? And in providing an incentive, a little bit of a carrot on this, is that we're going to give you 5 cents on every dollar that you go to your taxpayers, up to $1 million cap. So as we kind of look at the potential kind of implications of the referendum versus the tax levy incentive program, I'm just going to go through some of them. So the referendum, like I said, at this point, based upon trying to kind of refine the number, and it would probably be somewhere in the ballpark of around $240 to $250 million. The priorities would be MEP, which is mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, security cameras, HVAC, including air conditioning, science lab renovations, flooring, lighting, drop ceiling, all critical components, because most of these science labs haven't been really touched in any significant manner over the last 20 or 25 years. But the critical component of this about doing the referendum is that even if it gets approved by the community, it still lacks a systemic kind of opportunity to maintain this level of effort going forward, right? And this kind of refers back to my point before to say, hey, if we haven't been able to find money in our budget to adequately kind of keep up with that maintenance and those capital improvements, what makes us think that we're going to be able to do it consistently going forward in these 2% tax levy world? So the program, the tax levy incentive aid program, like I said, it would be through the appropriation. The DOE is actually managing it, and it requires us to submit an application. And like I said, the board resolution for consideration by the board tonight is literally just to submit the application. But the commitment, and this is a commitment that the administration and the board have to be prepared to make to the community, right? Which is, hey, we're going to set aside $12 million of that, whatever that dollar amount is. So over that same 20-year period, we basically have a similar investment to the referendum. And in exchange for that, within the next 10 years or even more, we probably won't have to go back out for a referendum to kind of to address these needs. For FY26, the application would be submitted primarily with those three subcategories. Facilities, obviously the biggest chunk, student supports, and then staffing. The other component of this is that the application timeline is expected, that we're expected to have kind of a response sometime by the end of the month, last week of April. And the intention there is so that districts that do get approved for this application have the opportunity to discuss it in public, at the public hearing, and if the board chooses to kind of take advantage of it and go from there. And like I said, the commitment is that in the component of this on an annual basis is the investment in the facilities, the privatization, the sequencing of projects, and the sustainability. And just as an example, the tentative budget that we submitted to the county had a replacement gym floor for Marlboro. But most recently, and based upon some previous experiences and situations, we have a roof leak on a roof above the gym floor that is out of warranty. So what that basically tells me is that I'm not going to recommend investing $350,000 or $400,000 on replacing that gym floor when there's a risk that there's going to be water on it, and now I'm going to have to create a patch again. So this is the sequencing component that we wouldn't have as much flexibility with the referendum that we would have in this program. And like I said, in terms of the commitment of the board, the issue is that moving forward, right, every year we would do a 2-year lookout. And that would basically make sure that everybody understood what the intent of these dollars were for and how it would be best to utilize them and prioritize these schedules. So, in essence, if the application gets approved and consequently the board approves the adoption of the funds into the FY26 budget, in FY27 we would commit having at least 12.2 available for a project. So from a dollars and cents standpoint, how does this pan out from a taxpayer? And I'll get to that in a second. The only major other difference between the two is the financially, the referendum, if all the applications are approved, the district would see a debt service aid in somewhere between 30 and 40% of the dollars, right? Depending on what the project is, the DOE has very specific kind of standards on that. In exchange for that, right, the interest saved by going on that program is roughly $119 million. So as we talked about it in finance, I shared that at the preliminary kind of gut feeling when this program was announced March 28th, and then basically they said, hey, if you're interested in doing this, you have to basically submit an application by April 14th. At face value, we thought that that number was going to be dramatically different from a financial impact to the taxpayer. But as you'll see in the next slides, the tax rate changes are not all that different. The major other component that relates to this tax levy incentive program is the emphasis on a thorough and efficient education. And as most of you might kind of guess, that has changed a little bit over the years with the Abbott decisions. So the application for this year has to be targeting those components. And then finally, although we would be bypassing potentially this debt service aid, the last component of that is that periodically the state does issue regular operating district grants, which basically would allow us to aggregate a certain number of projects that we would be able to get some kind of state funding for. So the net loss is not roughly that $7 million as shown. It's likely that it's going to be much less than that. So what you see here is basically three options that the board might choose to consider in a few weeks when we have the public hearing. The first option, option A, the first column, is literally just taking the FY25 tax levy, increasing that by 2%. Option B, the middle column, is that same 2% on top of the FY25, plus the referendum. And these numbers are the estimated numbers of what that payback period would be over the next 20 years. Year one is a little bit lower because typically you don't have a principal payment, it's just an interest payment. But for years 2 all the way through 20, basically it's around $12.9 million of debt service. So the overall payment is around 182. And then finally, column C, or the column on the right, is 2% on the FY25 plus the $19 million. So compared to the number that you see there, the $19 million, you will notice that on the previous slide, I mentioned $20 million. Okay, and the reason for it is because it's accounting for the $1 million that the state would match. So basically what that means is that the local taxpayer would see a 19 instead of a full 20 because the state picked up that first $1 million. So those are the comparables in terms of the general tax levy, which is our operating budget, our debt service, which is the repayment of debt, and obviously the full taxes to be raised. So in terms of how this kind of compares to each municipality, we're going to take it kind of from here. So on the left-hand side in green, you see the tax rates. These are the most recent tax rates by municipality. So every year, as part of the budget submission process, we basically will approve or kind of receive a regional share spreadsheet from the DOE. And that basically takes the equalized valuation of each municipality, which is down here, right? And the enrollment. I apologize for the typo, probably double and. But basically those numbers will change. And what basically, if you look at it, is to say, hey, if there's a municipality that is worth more and is sending more kids to the district, they're going to have a responsibility that's higher than a municipality that's going to be worth less and has less kids coming to the regional district, right? So those rates are already kind of estimated based upon the most recent information available on the Monmouth County ratables. On the right-hand side, you see a table that pretty much identifies each of the municipalities and those same 3 options and how these numbers change based upon those 3 options. So, for example, if you're in Englishtown, and I'm going to pick that one because the option is the highest at the end. So if the board chooses to go up just to 2%, the impact on this tax rate right here, the 28.3, would be an increase of 2.5%. If the board adopts possibly going out for a referendum and the community supports that, then that estimate would be close to 9.9%. So consequently, the numbers after that would be roughly 13.8 if we go with the third option. So what that basically means is that you have some municipalities that throughout all 3 options are expected to see their overall tax rate go down, and then you have other municipalities, just because of how their proportionate share plays out, will actually see an increase. So Marlborough, which happens to be the highest in terms of kind of this area right here, right, in this third option, would potentially see an increase of just over $300 annually. So that is based upon the average assessed home. So I know that Mr. Boyce, over the course of time, they didn't necessarily kind of share that information, not because he was trying to hide anything, but because nobody has the average assessed home, right? Just like somebody says, hey, can you do it based upon $1 million? Well, some people have $1 million home and some people don't. So for the most part, the easiest thing to look at is to say, hey, if I take out my tax bill and I look at my tax bill and I say, hey, the Frigo regional component of this is, I don't know, $2,500. Okay, I'm going to find my town. I'm going to basically say I'm going to add $2,500 plus 2.5 plus 9.9 plus 13.8. And then I'll see what those buckets actually mean to me as the individual taxpayer. So that's the estimated kind of impact on the tax rate based upon these 3 options. Like I said, at this point, the administration is recommending that we submit the application to DOE, see if we're eligible for it, and if so, what those dollar amounts are. And then as we prepare for the public hearing, then at that point, the board can kind of consider its options. The only other thing that I just want to kind of share, obviously the board is aware of this, with the community, we had tentatively had the public hearing scheduled for April 24th. Because we don't expect to see the determination on these applications until the week of the 28th, we're looking to kind of push back the public hearing just to make sure that we have as much information as possible so the board is making an informed decision.